Well, it's good to have my good friend Troy Page with us today. And Troy is a good friend because he's almost like a neighbor just down the road from where I live. And I always like to say, Troy, that you're one of my pastors too. Isn't that? Don't you love hearing that from me?
That does. Makes me feel so official. So
Well,
official.
Troy's actually been a friend from his days when he was working at Fellowship Church, and I'll let him share a little bit about that in a moment. And now is serving as a pastor. What is your official title? Is it Pastor of Creative Arts? What is your title?
The history of my life, I've never really known what the title was, but probably worship arts pastor, creative
Okay.
arts pastor. I oversee all the worship experience, communications, things of that
Okay.
nature.
And he's doing all of that from Westridge Church here near Atlanta. But tell us, Troy, a little bit. You came to Westridge a few years ago, but tell us about your time before that at Fellowship.
Well, it goes back to the early '90s. I attended Fellowship Church in pretty much its infancy, and was a volunteer there for about 4.5 years. And then they called me to go on staff, and I took over their singles ministry, and I ended up staying on staff there for 12 years, and did a number of different things, working on the executive team, everything from, again, singles, spiritual development, and missions, to creating bookstores, to campus pastor, to creative arts, communications, and marketing. That's just a few things
I guess so.
that I did while I was there. So I got a good internship.
I'd say. Well, today we're going to be talking with the folks here at the Coaching Network about the creative process, and basically the process. I know you, and it's great because now you've had a couple of experiences at Fellowship and at Westridge, and though I suspect there are some similarities in those two processes, you've probably seen the good and bad of what happens in both locations, and I'd love to hear some thoughts on that. But take us kind of back to the beginning for a church, thinking about where they're going, let's say in the coming months or year or so with their series planning. Can you kind of give us a picture of what a healthy system or what the framework would look like to set up a church for success when it comes to planning for future series in the coming months?
Right. I think that it's good. It's almost a funnel approach. I think you got to start big picture and think about what are the things you want to accomplish as a pastor, as a leader, as a church. First and foremost, what are the things you want your congregation to learn and to know? So we like to look at it over the course of a year. What are some of the broad types of categories we want to hit? Doctrinal things, relational issues, life stages, book studies. You just kind of have to know that, and that goes back to understanding your people, where they are, the context of your culture. And so we like to look at that and kind of have those big categories. And then from there, you just need to sit down with a big planning session and get the calendar out, the whiteboard. We did this just a few weeks ago and mapped out into the summer of next year. And we're able to sit down and think about some strategic points and things that we want to cover and talk about. Obviously, January is a big opening series. New Year, people want to come back. We wanted to get something that we could promote at Christmas. That would be I say hot topic, but hot topic doesn't necessarily mean a dumbing down type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that pricks the interest in the felt need, the emotional need that people have, so that they'll show up and then hear the truth from Scripture about what God says about this issue. So we like to open the January or August, when the school year starts, with something big that people would really be drawn to hook them and get them involved for that season. So we're following that up with a visionary kind of series. So we got them here, now let's get them involved, And so that kind of thought process. And then from there, we might brainstorm like titles, topics.
Okay. Let me pause for a second. In that initial planning meeting, what are the types of people that are most helpful in mapping out the big picture of where you're going with the different types of topics?
Well, for something like that, you don't want to get it too big, because if you get it too big, you get nowhere. There's too many people, too many opinions. But you want to have your good thinkers and the people that you want on board with this that need to. So we typically will have our teaching team, the guys who are teaching it, because they typically think in terms of how am I going to communicate this? Mm-hmm. What's going to work? What's my heart and passion? So the teaching guys are usually great. I like to have our worship, some of our worship staff who are going to think creatively, songs, and because all along the way. The other thing that happens is they're getting the vision of it. They're knowing where we're going. And so it gets them kind of excited about it as they move forward, what they have to do. I also like to have our communications guy because he's the one that's going to promote these things. Yeah. And he's going to know the schedule and know when this needs to be launched. And so typically teachers, worship people, communications people, they tend to be the best thinkers and creatives. But if you've got someone else that's just a good thinker, sometimes our wives are the best because they've got a whole nother perspective. I like to have a diverse crowd of men and women. Sometimes the guys, we get in there and we think about all of these cool guy cut series, and we forget that the women are sitting there and have a huge need that needs to be covered as well. So not too big, but think about the key players that need to be on board with this so that they can move it forward.
And I cut you off. You're just about ready to start into kind of going from that big planning into the series planning itself. Again, how far out do you think is appropriate to begin planning for a series? Who should be involved in that conversation? Is it the same people? Is it different people? How do you approach that?
Well, I will say this, that the senior pastor is always, or the lead teacher, let's say, needs to be involved in this. I've made the mistake of planning things out without that person's approval or involvement necessarily. And so then they come in and they're like, well, I'm not really feeling this. And we've already made all these decisions and gone down this path and got all excited about it, and they're not feeling it. So it could be a waste of time. So you definitely need to have that key guy that's going to be the key decision maker that says, yes, let's do this. And I'm just a big believer that I go with the pastor's heart. So a lot of times I just want him to both any place I've ever been, it's always been, what are you feeling first? That's the senior guy. What's on your heart? What are you feeling? Let him map it out. Because a lot of times he's already got it, or God is already working on him with some ideas and some thoughts. And then we can come up behind that and maybe strategically put it in the right place in the calendar. Be able to put the right legs to it as far as the creativity and what you call it and how you spin it and wheel it and deal it and all of that. But I definitely think having that lead guy there. So what we typically do now is we'll map out like usually if you can get like a quarter to 6 months. Most churches run in seasons. We've got from now to Easter. Got Easter to the summer. Then we've got the summer. Right. So if you get those big chunks done, that's great. Any more that you can do, if your church and your senior pastor is the kind of guy that can do that, then the farther out, the better. For us, creative arts people, worship guys, the more notice you can have on things, our life just got so much greater, so much better. It's so much easier to plan ahead and to map things out financially. And to get people resourced and able to work on it ahead of time.
Yeah. And again, this is where your experiences with both churches has probably been helpful for you to see. I suspect that because of the resources that Fellowship has, the planning didn't have to be as far out, and you were still able to pull off creative elements because you had staff and a little bit more financial resources to pull that off. Is that not true?
Yeah, and so much of it goes back to your lead guy and just his personality. Some guys just cannot plan out, and if you did, they're going to change it anyway, so it was a waste of time.
Right.
So at Fellowship, we would plan out, 4 to 5 months, 6 months even at times out. At least, we would meet in the summer, and we would have August through December mapped out. And now we may not have exact topics for every Sunday and scripture laid out and down to that type of detail, but we would at least have the series and the number of weeks it might be mapped out so that we could then take that from a creative standpoint, begin to design and brainstorm ideas for that. But definitely, if you have money What I've learned is this: if you want something fast, then you need to either have time or money to get it done. And if you want to get something done, so.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up the point of not having all the scripture nailed down. I mean, the whole message hasn't been written, and yet the creative teams are kind of off doing their thing. And I suspect if I'm a teaching pastor, if I've not done that before, that makes me a little bit nervous to know that either there's this tension that I need to finish my message faster, or that I need to be on top of all of the details of what the creative team's working on to make sure it fits with my message. Talk to the guy that's feeling that tension, Troy.
We all feel it, and I think every church is a little bit different, and there's no really right or wrong way, and you can get caught up in the frustration of, if you're the guy that needs to have it all filled out and all the blanks filled in and the check marks there, you're probably going to be frustrated in a lot of environments. And that's just kind of the way it is. Doesn't mean you can't get better. So I think you've got to kind of know your senior people, the people who are teaching, and know that there are some pastors who love to plan. We've got some guys on our teaching team, he'll map out a series, he'll have it all together, the whole thing, and plans ahead. And Brian, our senior pastor, he's going to work the week of for that message. And I have pushed now that 2 weeks out, we're able to at least talk about it and to just kind of have a vision of where you want to go with it, so that it helps us. So you got to know those people. And I think as a creative arts people, you learn to work within that structure. So for us, there are times we go, you know what? We don't know completely where we're going. So you know what? We're going to have great worship, and we're going to sing Jesus songs.
You can't go wrong.
They may not be themed that much. We'll put that in the greeting and in the offering setup. Those things that are in flux, the week of. Yeah. And we'll just make it great that way.
That's right. That's right. You were talking a little bit about series planning. And I'll jump to service planning here in a second. But thinking about series, you mentioned, coming out of Christmas into January, trying to kind of have that big hook series. Churches are looking for those opportunities to connect with as many people as possible. I mean, what are you seeing as far as trends as how to engage the most people possible, Troy? Are you seeing anything as it relates to either topics or how you approach the series planning process to engage folks?
Well, I don't think things have changed a whole lot in the 15 years I've been doing this. I mean, there are still those times of year when people are going to come back to church. And sometimes it doesn't matter what you're doing. There will be a crowd that will come back and get more involved just because school's starting, because New Year's resolutions, whatever. But I think when you are able to put something out there, and for those folks who are wanting to get back in church and they know, oh, your church is doing something, oh, I like that, then they're going to pick your church.
Right.
They're going to decide to come for that service, and be a little more motivated. So I think strategic times of year. I also think hot topics that, just look at our culture and what people are dealing with. Marriages and families are struggling. Marriages are failing by epic proportions. And so anytime you talk about that, people come out of the woodwork for it. Obviously, anytime you talk about sex and that type of thing, getting into, other hot topics that people, work, career type stuff, money, maybe not a giving series, but how to have more money and make it, those types of things. You just have to look, what are the stress points in people's lives, right, and figure out how to speak to those. And again, I know some people shy away from those things. They think, well, if we do that, I'm giving in to all of these contemporary guys who are just trying to be cool and you're just chasing cool. But I really believe that what we're doing here is we're throwing people a lifeline. And, just because you're talking about a hot topic does not mean God doesn't have a very distinct plan and purpose in Scripture that we need to understand, and through that come to know Christ in a more profound, deeper way, and allow Him to change our lives. And I think a lot of times we're expecting people to take these huge leaps in their faith when they just can't get beyond the fact that they can't pay their bills, or their marriage is tanking, and we want them to serve somewhere, or to be in a big Bible study. And there are those things that I think that need to be tweaked up in people's life to give them the clarity to even take the greater steps in the faith.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. All right, so let's drill down even further. Now we're gearing up for an upcoming service. I'm suspecting when you're planning specific elements in that service that the group of people that are doing that is very different from the folks that were planning at the very beginning of the process. Is that true?
Yeah. We Google Docs is your friend. So we typically do a Google Doc that lists out all the series that we're going to do from now through May. Okay, and we may have like teachers lined up, and we may have key scriptures, or at least the topic of each week. We're doing a series in January that we made up a word. Well, we think we made it up, called Simplexity. It's about how we've made our lives so complex when God really made it pretty simple. And so we're taking principles from Proverbs.
That's good.
Our life. And so we've mapped out all those Proverbs for that 4 weeks, already. We don't know all the detail of it, but we know that. So usually we'll have the Google Doc with all the series plugged in, at least broad topics. And then I sit down with my team, which would be our creative arts team, which would be our worship music people, our video people, usually our communications guys, because he's great at it and he needs to market it, promote it. At times I'll pull in a student pastor, or my wife is set in at times, or just you want people that will contribute, though, that have an idea and are good thinkers, And so we'll sit down, and we will. Are you wanting me to get into kind of the process at this point?
Yeah, I mean, what you think would be helpful in the context of all the guys here in this coaching network, Troy?
I think it's just getting strategic with it, and simply strategic.
I like that. Well, here, let me ask you a couple practical questions. How far out are you planning elements for specific services?
We will do a series at a time. So because of Christmas and Thanksgiving, and we've been through some things here recently, we're a little behind for the January series, but we're doing that this week. I usually get on the whiteboard and make columns, and on there we'll have music ideas, we'll have video ideas, promotions. It's really key to think about what are the big things coming up in your church and plug those in on those weeks as well. Because sometimes those will be the big idea for that week. You may not have a lot of space to do something on the topic, but you've got to move people toward Easter, or toward an offering, or a student activity, or something that's going on. So you want to make sure you have those things so you're not forgetting about them. You're not cramming too much into a service. So we'll list out music idea, and these guys have to come to the table with that things already done. Some ideas in their minds, and then we'll map out each week with some ideas. And usually just in talking about it, we'll think of just some little creative hooks and things that we could do, types of videos that we could do for the series, and we'll list those things out, and we'll try to march toward those things. Now, flexibility is key. I mean, sometimes as you get into a series, you realize that seemed like a great idea then, but now it's just not going to work. We don't have the people, we don't have time, we don't have the money, and you have to be able to work toward that. But I try to always be 2 weeks out with a definite plan, pretty much having it in stone, at least 2 weeks,
Now, whenever you're working on planning and artists are a part of that there's a couple of challenges. Number one, if I'm an artist and I have an idea, my tendency will be really to hold on to that idea as long as I can. But then secondly, let's say you take my idea and you begin to run with it, and then at some point down the road you decide we're not going to go with that. How do you work with artists through that tension?
Well, sometimes I think those are the refining moments in a person's life to realize that it doesn't revolve around you. You know, I have a tendency to hire people that are not so artsy.
Okay.
You know, I like to work with the team that has a good balance on that. And part of that is personality. Part of it is just a spiritual discipline that you have to realize that, you know, sometimes it's not going to work, and sometimes ideas aren't going to happen. So I think it has to be a lot of dialogue. And I think what happens with us a lot of times is in those conversations, they'll realize it's not working because there's just some barriers here that we can't move beyond, and they'll ultimately, you know, realize, well, okay. And I always like to use the thing of keep that in mind, because we can use that another time. Just
That's
because
good.
even when I'm teaching, you know, you have to take stuff out of the message, and you just say, okay, I'll just preach that another time, you know. So we'll hold on to those ideas and use them. And sometimes God just edits things for you, and you just can't get that attached to it.
That's good. All right. Well, Troy, I appreciate you giving us this time today to talk through these issues related to the creative process. Let me ask you this one last thing. Talk to me about the relationship between the creative arts pastor or leader, whoever's responsible in that area, with the relationship with the senior pastor or the primary teaching pastor. What does it look? What makes that a healthy relationship so that you're helping the senior pastor and the senior pastor is helping you be better at what you do?
Right. Well, I really come from the perspective that God has a chain of command, and He is the key guy. He is the guy that God has placed, not me. And so my ultimate role is to support and to come underneath Him. And all too often, I think this role is a drain on that senior guy. You know, that, you know, the worship people, all they want to do is be creative and do their own thing. And, you know, I want to get under his authority and to listen to his ideas and try to get to know his brain and what he thinks and what works for him, and go there and try to build programs that will come underneath and support that message, what God is using him to do as best I can. So that's number one. I just think that now does that mean I'm just a yes man, and no, I speak my mind, and I try to share, and I try to throw out ideas, you know, try to be proactive with things. But also I found that, you know, when I worked with Ed Young, it was totally different than Brian Lloyd. They're both great leaders and respect them highly. But they are totally different thinkers. Is uber creative. And so just a creative idea for him would just blow up from there, because he just would, you know, thrive on it. Brian doesn't think in those realms, so I can't expect him to, and I can't make him fit something that he's not. So we have decided little things like we will not do a bumper before his message, because the transition is awkward for him. So could we do some cool things? Yeah, but I'm not going to be so tied to that I'm make him feel awkward, you know, in doing that. So it's really about supporting his vision and trying to come underneath him and leading strong along the way.
That's good. All right. I don't think we've convinced you to be a regular blogger yet, but you do have an active Twitter account, right? I do. And hopefully this blog will come back. Okay. Well, share with the Coaching Network. Where can they find you? Well, Troy Page is my Twitter. What do you call that, Tony? A Twitter handle? A Twitter handle? Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. All I know is you're in my tweet deck, and your picture shows up every now and again. That's it. And then my blog is troypage.com. I do have some things there. A lot of things earlier this year when I was going through, you know, the whole struggle with cancer and things of that nature. So I'm hoping that will be resurrected real soon. All right, that's good. Well, I appreciate you hanging out with us today, Troy. Thanks a lot. It was fun. All right.